Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, welcome back to Just a Walk of Life. I'm your host, Mickey, like the mouse, but without the E. And on today's episode, a little bit of social commentary. I think the easiest way for me to introduce today's theme is to kind of pose a leading question. So here it goes. This is what I've been thinking about recently, what I want to dive into today. The question goes, to what extent does a good person who also strives to be a good friend tailor themselves to others at the risk of they themselves compromising their own authenticity? Now, I know that sounds a little galaxy brain. It sounds like I'm being bombastic and trying to reach a essay word count. So allow me to kind of break it down into the dimensions that I'm kind of thinking. And yes, the underlying assumption here is that authenticity is part of what makes a person good or a friend that's good. And I understand that good is a very subjective adjective. So allow me to set up the parameters of this so we can have this discussion. There are two types of people in terms of how they act as friends. Some of you might have picked up on this kind of pattern or maybe even categorize your friends as such. But the way I like to see it is social support kind of is on a spectrum, with logical support being on one end and emotional support on the other end, right? Logical would be more like you go to a friend with a problem and they listen to your problem and they analyze it for you. They'll tell you what they think and what they see, what sticks out to them, and they'll tell you what they think is the sensible approach to the problem. That's kind of their way of empathizing, is to put themselves in your footsteps and approach the problem for you in order to help you out. On the other end of the spectrum, on the more emotional support side, this is your friend that sits with you, listening to your problems and validating your emotions. They're not going to tell you what to do because, quite frankly, they understand that that's not what you're looking for. Let me put it on record that I am not trying to say that there is a better or a proper way to be a friend, because we're all different, and whatever kind of support we're good at providing, in my opinion, should be the kind of support that a friend who's reaching out to you should be expecting. My definition of being a good person essentially boils down to being kind, and as an extension to that, being a good friend is to be able to provide support to another human being, with the caveat that it should be communicated clearly, there is no malice, and at the same time, still be challenging enough to push that person ahead instead of enabling them to be coddled and comfortable or complacent. In another light, this is kind of an observation I made in terms of a method of delivery of feedback and the openness and ability to take criticism. What makes this so much more interesting to me, though, is especially in modern society nowadays, there is a potential for mismatching these kinds of support systems. And quite frankly, if, especially on the logical side, you were to misspeak and or be insensitive to the emotional aspect of support, that in a way your opinions kind of get invalidated. And if we push it even further, accounting for this growing disparity of, the importance and the need to recognize how people feel emotionally, I feel that there's a big opportunity to sever the ties of emotional connection and only make an environment conducive for like people to support like people, as in logically thinking and supportive people will tailor towards that group and emotional people on that other end, which to me doesn't sound like a society that I would want to be a part of. Now, I'm also a human being, so I have my own faults. Let me make that very clear. I'm glad to have been able to pick up on these two distinct kind of approaches. But if I worry that if I cater too much towards one side or the other, especially if I'm not in the right mindset to do so, I might come off as unauthentic, which is something that I never want to do. And I think the best way for me to kind of illustrate my journey in terms of how to position myself on this spectrum can be best seen with a number of stories. So allow me to bring them to you. However, very quickly, I do want to make a sort of PSA. So I must give credit for this topic to one of my great friends. She goes by Gina. Thank you, Gina, if you're listening. I had reached out to her the other day and we had just natural human discourse. And this topic came up and it's been on my mind for the most part of this week. And since it's on my mind, I think it's only fair that I share it with all of you. In terms of the PSA portion, I want to push all of you to take action this week. By the end of this week, I would like for you all to have reached out to one person and try to catch up with them. Seeing how we're all kind of struggling in these pandemic times, we are trying to navigate an ocean that we have never seen before. During this pandemic, we're all kind of struggling. And from what I've been picking up, we're mostly sitting around, which is absolutely fine. There's no need to be productive 100% of the time. With that said, though, we are human, we are social creatures, and the way I look at it is if we're going to sit around, we might as well sit around together. We also have the edge of improving technology. Think about the Spanish flu, during which most people had accepted their fate as sheltering in place, or whatever the term was at the time, and they didn't have a tool such as the internet. Since we have access to the internet, I believe we should use it, and the way we use it can be as follows. If you struggle to reach out to people, if you struggle to kind of make that first initiation, you're not alone. That's what I've noticed amongst my friends. If it is absolutely necessary, you may use what I'm about to share word for word, as long as it helps you cause this ripple effect in terms of outreach. This is what I like to say. This is what I like to say because it is the most truthful for me. Hey, blank, I've been thinking about you. I would like to catch up. When is a good time for a call? Plain and simple, it does two things. One, people love being reached out to. That will make their day. I guarantee it. And secondly, or I guess two, you will feel better. You're opening a door that you haven't opened in a long time, most likely. And that brings in so much more variability and opportunity in your life, whether you know it or not. And overall, I think it's just a good thing to do. In the end, it's your choice, so do as you please, but let's all try to make the world a better place, or at least leave it better than we found it this morning. Now, as we circle back to the topic at hand, I am of Vietnamese descent. I am a full-bred Vietnamese. My parents are both immigrants from Vietnam. And culturally, I believe that we are more apt to creating thick skin for our young. Here's an example. If you have a cute child, you will never hear those words being uttered from any Vietnamese elder's mouth. The logic goes that we do not want them to have a big ego or to let it get to their heads. And so we must stifle the positivity as soon as possible by telling them instead that they are ugly and they have ugly characteristics and traits and that they should always be self-improving. Now, whether that's toxic, that's not for me to say. I definitely see how it can become toxic. But if that's a point of contention for you, maybe you should consider where your definition of toxic comes from. Now, in Southeast Asian culture, or specifically in rural Vietnamese cultures, filial piety and humility are kind of two of the biggest pillars when it comes to the individual. And as such, they've been huge parts of my life. Are these conservative ideas? Potentially. But that doesn't take away the validity of the concept in a modern environment. For better or for worse, I do have many friends with whom I can relate to over this kind of idea or concept. Where it gets interesting is that over the years, especially after going to college, I learned the importance of picking a time and a place for exemplifying or manifesting these ideals. The best way for me to kind of illustrate what I'm saying is to share some stories. So here's a story that had me take a double take and represents, I guess, a sort of culture shock when it came to my more conservative Asian views clashing with a more corporate professional culture in the States. So at my time in undergrad, as a business major, we had to do a number of business projects. Seeing as business is the interaction of human beings to manipulate their environment and their resources to get to a certain goal, I think it's only fair that we kind of practice that in a scholarly environment. But for most of us who have, at one point in our life, had to work with a group, we will know that kind of the first thing you do is to survey the room, test it out, and kind of see where everyone's at. I was taught to see this as kind of management of effort. And it was good practice to, while you're making your introductions, kind of share what you're aiming for or what your goals are. It might sound simple now, but at the time, it was a very novel idea, right? Because I thought that everyone was striving for the best grade or the best result. It never really occurred to me that some people are really okay with just getting a C and moving on. Not trying to say that one is better than the other. It's just that was my first time being exposed to the differences that have always been there and just I haven't noticed. So this story includes 4 people, one of which is myself, and the other 3. We will call them Nika, Ian, and Jose, just for simplicity's sake, for storytelling ease. A little background on the project: we were in a biz communication class, and the goal of the class was to work in a group, do some research, and then to present our findings. This project was to span the whole quarter. It was up to us to decide how we wanted to pace ourselves. But in the end, we all had, the whole class, everyone in the class had to have a presentation ready and a report to submit. So when we finally got the first meeting up and running, right, when we were to meet everyone, we also had one of those feeling out moments. So Nika took it upon herself to kind of lead the discussion. Again, no animosity in that statement, just a factual observation. And it was clear that she was very focused and she wanted to do well, right? And I'm all for that. Also keep in mind that Nika and Ian are rather close friends. And Jose is kind of on the side, I believe, was a stranger to all of us, about a very easygoing person who is also trying to do well. Now, according to the professor's kind of urging, we also talked about, what we're aiming for. And actually, we found that everyone was trying to get an A for resume and GPA purposes, which is always great news. For what it's worth, Nika's approach to kind of feeling out the room was to ask people how they were. I'm not very comfortable saying it myself because I don't really understood the way she wanted to extract this kind of information, but it was clear that she was trying to see our work ethic in terms of basically, I hate to say it, but if we were intelligent enough to work with her. So being me, and at the time I was a different person, I didn't know what I know now, I took a more reserved approach to her question. I think she had asked about our performance in other classes or like our track record up to that point, basically trying to see if we were getting A's or getting C's. I have a suspicion that because of my very distinct physique and the way I present myself in terms of my dress code, she probably didn't have too high of expectations for me. Again, absolutely fine. But when she asked me this question, so when she asked me kind of how my classes were going and how I'm doing in my classes rather, my humble side got the best of me, and I said that I was doing pretty all right. Now, in retrospect, it's clear that she took that as me trying to deflect the question, as in I have worse grades than she does, and I'm not trying to say it, and I just kind of want to dismiss the question so that we can continue, and I guess in her eyes, so I can skate by and have the 3 of them do a lot of work and me just kind of get the A, right? Again, I cannot confirm that this is what she thought. This is just my inkling of kind of the way that she read the situation. And frankly, I cannot blame her for, what she came up with. And now whether or not what happened was a direct result of the way I presented myself, I'm not sure. But I can say that the next 7 to 8 weeks was very frustrating to me, to say the least. Basically, what ended up happening was whenever we would get together, Ian and Nika would be leading the conversation, and I'm sitting back with my own thoughts, but I'm being reserved because I tend to be a very loud personality. And because I try to be aware of that, I like to sit back as much as I can before I kind of speak up and make everyone feel a certain way. It's just something I do that I find kind of helps the team dynamics. But what frustrated me about what I was doing was every time I spoke up, they spoke over me. I don't know if you ever had that experience where you would say something in a group setting and you would be completely ignored. And then when somebody else says the same thing, um, it's immediately a great idea. I'm not bitter about it, but that's exactly what happened. It was the first time in my life that I had experienced this thing. Again, not trying to toot my own horn, but it was just very shocking to me that I could be so assertive and yet so ignored. And I really didn't know how to approach the situation because it was the first time that I've seen it. And so I just, I kept pressing when I could, but it was clear that, despite me saying, I think we should do X, the whole conversation they had just continued as if I never said anything. Now, I do admit that if I had liked the way that I saw the project was going, I would have had no problem kind of sitting back and doing the most work that they wanted from me, but I didn't. And that's what made it so much more, I guess, well, definitely so much more frustrating, but I guess after the fact, so easy to recall and to make a lesson out of. And so it was about week 8. We all, like everyone else, kind of put it off until the last minute. So we met up for the first time with the intent on taking things seriously. For those of you who are not familiar with business settings, most of the time, the reason why business has such a bad image is because half the time is trying to get everyone together and on the same page and available. And then when you do finally manage that, no work has actually been done, or just because the team never had the opportunity to kind of walk through what they were thinking and find some common ground. So I remember we were meeting outside of Jose's place. I ran into Nika and we were just kind of making small talk on the outside while we waited for Jose to let us in. And, as students, one of the few things you can talk about is school. And so that's kind of what we fell upon. Nika and I also were in the same marketing class at the time, and a midterm had just finished. She asked me, how did I do? So at that point, I was very done with the group. I was ready to move on in terms of just my focus in my career. The quarter was almost over, and I was looking forward to taking more operative classes tailored towards a specific industry. So I saw no reason to kind of play nice or to tailor myself in any way to kind of manage my perception in Nika's eyes. So I just told her straight up that I did well. I had aced the midterm. I am a business major, and it's not very impressive. It turns out that she didn't do as hot as she would have liked. And so one thing led to another, and she basically found out that my GPA was pretty up there. Again, the whole reason why I don't bring it up is because I don't like all the underwritings and the messages between the lines that inevitably come up when you start to talk about these kinds of, personal performance statistics. It turns out that that's exactly what needed to happen, because from that moment onwards, my word was king. As weird as it sounds, for the last 2 weeks, the whole dynamic of the team shifted. Whenever I said something, it was very clear that it was heard. I know it sounds unreal, and quite frankly, it felt unreal at the time. It was just very astounding to me to kind of see such a 180 so quickly. But the only thing I can kind of chalk it up to is her perception of me, and, what was once a lazy, not put together person is now actually probably the most driven of the group. And again, I'm imagining that this is what went through her mind. We never talked about it. I don't really particularly care. This story is more about the kind of exploration that I went through than it is about, what I could have done to help her. I think that if she cared enough, then this moment would mean something to her and she would have gotten something out of it. And if not, it ain't nobody's business. Long story short, I guess it suffices to say that that was a huge lesson for me to kind of pick my battles in terms of when I want to be humble and when I need to sell myself. And quite frankly, it helped a lot in my 4th year when I was almost off to the workforce and I needed to come home, or at least I told myself I needed to come home with a position in order to help out the family. This is something that I never would have experienced without, or quite frankly, without the business education. Let me put it on record. I think business degrees are amazing for the right person. And I think that there's a lot of practical knowledge for the real world that we don't really get in outside in our public schooling in terms of K through 12. And then, honestly, as much as I hate to say it, in other more looked upon majors. Just to round out the thought, things like how taxes work and how to manage your finances, all the stuff that I think kind of builds the foundation of somebody's frame of life. And because of this experience, I'm not very shy in terms of sharing my grades anymore, because at this point, I see it less of bragging or being humble and more of, hey, to be a good team member, I need to portray myself accurately and to give the team the most accurate representation of each member's strengths and weaknesses. I'm glad that I was in a position to be able to kind of learn this lesson the way I did, because I'm well aware, if I was in a worse place, I wouldn't have gotten the same kind of message. I do try to be the type to seek feedback and to be okay with constructive criticism, which reminds me of something else that happened during this project, and that was that Jose called me out on something that I was doing that I wasn't even aware of. But I think, again, that it did so much more benefit than it did harm. And I'm very grateful that Jose spent the time to call me out. So what happened was, in the natural flow of conversations, going back and forth between what we want to do or what the project should be focused on, I tried to be the type of person I am. I'm always thinking about all the problems, right? I'm future oriented, and I like to think, okay, well, there's a trap here. We might fall into this trap there and end up wasting all our time because we can't finish a project. That's kind of my mentality in general, and especially at the time. And so when we were talking about all these potential ways that we can approach the project, I kept speaking up about, what about this or what about that? I don't see how we can do this portion of that project. After a while of just kind of running this gambit, Jose messages me on the side and he says, "It's clear that you care a lot about the project. However, the fact that you keep bringing up obstacles is not helping us get anywhere. And so it would be a lot more helpful for the team if you were to be solution oriented and not problem oriented." That was a very powerful message at the time for me. I hope that, the fact that I can bring it up and talk about it kind of speaks for how important it was for me to hear that at the time. Yes, I mean, I was very startled, but I wasn't upset. I was very appreciative of, the effort that Jose made just to even call me out, because Jose could have just rolled their eyes and kind of let it happen, just kind of check out and finish the class, and that was that. But they took the opportunity to give me some feedback, and it really altered my perception. I've actually told this story a number of times and used that specific line when it comes to listening to other people's approaches in their problems and burst their bubble and just kind of drop the fact that they're not really getting anywhere and they're really just stressing themselves out by focusing on other problems. So to recap, as much frustration came out of the project, I think the value in the project being assigned in the first place is more so the interpersonal kind of exploration than it is the practice of researching and then presenting. Something that I think business majors or anyone really kind of overlooks when it comes to a formal education. And now to, I guess, kind of bring it around to the leading question, suffice it to say, everything I just shared kind of shaped me to who I am today, and it definitely has made a lasting impact on my personality. And so if we change the frame of reference to more of a kind of friendship environment, I have also another story that I think best speaks for just how much I've grown since that time, since the first story in second year, and where I found myself in my fourth year. So this story involves one of my closest friends. He is great for bouncing ideas off of and playing devil's advocate, and overall he's just a really good time. And so we had a miscommunication, to say the least. And thankfully, because of everything I've been through, I was woke enough to salvage the friendship. And so without getting into specifics, it basically came down to, I said something that in my head that meant something completely different than what he heard. Your classic impact versus intent. And but it was clear that something had been up for a while in terms of I then learned that it was an ongoing thing, which kind of pointed out to me something of my personality that now I'm very hyper aware of, but at the time I managed to just kind of overlook. And that is that I tend to be quite brutal with my true friends. I have quite a standard when it comes to people I like to keep around. And I figured that if, not only do I deem you worthy to keep around, but that you also accept this kind of unspoken invitation or acceptance, and that you accept me for who I am as well. And so that kind of entails just how, I guess, teasing I could be. I want to say that this is because of, culturally, I am very used to being told things, nice things, not as often as mean things. And so I just kind of filled in a blank as to everyone's able to kind of hear this because that's kind of how I conduct myself and they haven't left yet. But I think it's fair to say that I do tease my friends quite a bit. In terms of what was happening here, my teasing had gotten the worst of him. And again, this is my fault for not seeing if not only am I overstepping, but if he's even okay with kind of my teasing. But it just kind of carried on, throughout our friendship. I saw nothing of it. We teased each other. That was kind of the part of the banter that, in my eyes, was quite natural. But the straw that broke the camel's back was a comment that genuinely I meant as a compliment. It was taken in a way that made me look like a jackass, basically. And again, I want to point out, like, just how unnatural what I did at the time would have been for, previous Mickey. But at the time, I had gone through so many things in terms of personal and social development that I kind of saw the way that I think was the most optimal way to approach the situation. And so, first of all, I must say that I do admire the fact that he opened up about it and he actually told me explicitly that he felt that certain way. Because let's face it, that's not something that is easy to do. And so, right off the bat, I pointed that out because genuinely and truthfully, I admired that about him. And so, this was a textual conversation. But when I read, what he said, it was as if we were speaking face to face. I think that if you're able to kind of have that going on in your head, if you can kind of imagine that person in terms of their speaking style and the tone of voice, etc., in text conversation, that person should probably be kept around just because there's an intrinsic level of understanding between the two of you. And I definitely would say that, and I kind of share this. But when I read what he said, I was very taken aback because this kind of came out of left field for me. And it took me a while to kind of, know what to say. But in the end, I just told him that I was sorry, first and foremost, because knowing how I tend to tease my friends a lot, I kind of came in to reply with that on the forefront of my mind. And I apologized and I said that, and I took responsibility for how he felt. I read his messages multiple times because I really wanted to understand just how I was being perceived. And then I told him that I was very sorry for what I said. I'm very sorry that I hurt his feelings, and I never really intended for it to be that way. I also let him know sincerely, because it's the truth, that he is one of the best people that I know. I look up to him more than he probably knows. And that's my fault for not kind of saying that earlier on. And then I brought up the fact that, I understand that he is upset with me, even if that's not what I wanted or intended to happen. But I told him that if he needed the time, obviously I'm going to step away and kind of give that to him. And I respected that if he no longer wished to speak, as much as that would hurt my feelings, I understand because at some point you have to draw the line for, respecting someone's decision. And that was that. I mean, I told him all of that and then I just kind of left it alone, which I'll tell you now would have been extremely difficult for me just because of the person I am. I always like to kind of keep tabs on my perception in kind of, I guess, the ether, just to make sure that I don't conduct myself in any mysteriously malicious way. But I felt like at that point I had done all that I could do, and it was up to him. The ball was in his court, to decide if I truly meant what I meant, and if he could forgive me for being so in my head that I wasn't able to be a good friend and kind of pick up on the things that arguably a good friend should have been able to pick up on. And I would like to say that this kind of pronounces the emotional side of my brain that had been lost for quite a while at that point. Just personal issues and things of the like that kind of occupy your mind when you're in you're nearing your college career's ending and you don't really know what you want to do with your life. I am happy to tell you though that everything worked out well. We moved on and we're still, I'd say, rather close. And I'm sitting here now, with a very big kind of pair of binoculars in terms of being able to scope out when I interact with people, just how brutal I can be. Even this past week, I've decided to give my friends a break just because I realized how much teasing I had done. And I think that overall, it made me more satisfied with myself, and it also makes for a better time when you're interacting with other people. So for what it's worth, folks, I hope you enjoyed my stories, and I hope that my insight can kind of give you some more on yours. Maybe you're struggling with somebody right now, or maybe you're an older folk chuckling to yourself. But whatever the case, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for tuning in to Just a Walk of Life. I was your host, Mickey, like the mouse, but without the E. And until next time, take it easy and take care, everybody.